Although I can't exactly say this episode resolved the previous part's cliffhanger especially spectacularly, it suffices and does demonstrate that the Cybermen aren't totally invincible. For that reason, I am glad, but it does feel like it's all a bit resolved pretty easily, as the Doctor somehow can destroy about 6 Cybermen with what we assume is a bit of the TARDIS. Although rather interestingly, this isn't actually answered, as when questioned the Doctor deflects the question, opting to run away instead. Interesting. One thing I must address immediately is the fabulous direction in this two-parter by veteran Who director Graham Harper. Harper is, most notably, the only director to work on both the classic and revived series. Harper did some quite frankly astonishing work on the original series, producing 2 genuinely classic episodes, The Caves of Androzani and Revelation of the Daleks, at a point when the series was in steep decline. As such, he earned his invitation to work on the more modern series. Harper has made quite an impression, directing 4 episodes of the second series, 2 of the third, and 5 of the fourth. That's a fairly impressive list of accomplishments, and I think it's fair to say that each of those was elevated by Harper's direction. Harper's work on the series, both old and new, is stunning, especially when he is given the right material to work with. For example, the last minutes of Utopia, for example, rank among some of the best the show has ever produced. The Caves of Androzani is on the shortlist of the best Doctor Who stories ever. However, you can really spot a great director by how they react to fairly middle-of-the-road material, and that is the case here. And to be blunt, The Age of Steel is very middle-of-the-road. It's effectively a standard Doctor Who runaround with a conventional bad guy waiting at the end and some half-decent emotional beats included. Nothing about The Age of Steel seems like a classic. The script is probably best described as functional, hitting all the necessary notes and plot points, but lacking the wit or the follow-through to truly excel. So Harper is given a script that is basing a very shallow runaround, and he makes it work. Harper does an excellent job with the Cybermen. The redesign is great, but Harper also uses it remarkably well. He shoots the Cybermen from lower angles, as I said before, to make them seem more imposing and threatening than ever before, and he manages to make the death of these metallic monsters at the climax of the episode actually mean something. You almost feel sorry for them as you see them screaming and clutching their heads in agony. It gives the handy and convenient technobabble solution a bit of weight that he otherwise wouldn't have had. Harper turns The Age of Steel into a reasonably successful blockbuster adventure that would have been lacking somewhat without his magnificent input. Harper's direction also helps gloss over the occasional plot contrivance needed to make this episode work. How does the Cyber Controller get to the roof so damn quickly at the climax? Why, if the Cybermen are converting millions of people, we're told that there are already 6,500 and rising converted, then why do they have Cybermen sleeping in Deep Cold 6? Awaken the army, as Cybermen commands, but you'd imagine they probably need every available Cyberman on the street. It's to Harper's credit that he keeps things moving so fast, so you don't mind these sort of logical questions. Which is nice, because there are a couple of good ideas here, but not enough to sustain the episode on its own terms. A lot of them, obviously, carry over from the last episode. Once again, the villain is unchecked capitalism, as the Doctor himself can't understand how a billionaire could have that much power. After the attack on the mansion, the Doctor protests, but he's overreached himself. He's still just a businessman. He's assassinated the president. All we need to do is get to the city and inform the authorities. It turns out this idea is hopelessly naive. Once again, Lumic feels too much like a cardboard villain. He's a lamer version of Davros, but for the Cybermen, and somehow shallower than that particular wheelbound megalomaniac. Although I do like that the Cybermen do pimp out his wheelchair when they make him Cyber Controller. I mean, I'd want a Cyber Throne, goddammit. Again, it makes no sense for him to go completely off the reservation so quickly. After all, this is a guy who simply wants to live a bit longer. You'd imagine that marching big metal men branded with his corporation logo into a takeover of the capital city would be low on his list of priorities. Lumic's defining characteristics are that he's a very rich man who wants to live forever, and that's it. We know he's still concerned about his wealth because he has copyrighted the formula used in the Cyberman procedure. If he is so altruistic about converting the world, then why would he do that? So, surely it makes no sense for him to turn the population into Cybermen. Who's going to buy his stuff? Indeed, you'd imagine that Lumic would have a better job selling that upgrade to the public instead of upgrading the public by force. That is what was so unnerving about the Cybermen in the 10th Planet, the notion that they had chosen to do that to themselves. It was something that was so very alien. Unlike a lot of later appearances, the Cybermen were relatively logical arguments for their worldview. They were monsters because their perspective was so foreign and so incomprehensible to us. That was a great idea all those years ago, and it's a shame that the series has never really revisited that concept. Except, of course, in Series 10, maybe. Instead, the Age of Steel reduces the Cybermen to a generic invasion force working at the whim of an insane wheelchair-bound megalomaniac. It looks like the decision to develop a catch rate wasn't the only aspect of the Cybermen inherited from the Daleks. This weakens the episode and turns them into such more conventional story of good and evil, removing a lot of the distinctive and unique aspects of the Cybermen. Of course, those aspects have been consciously played down over the decades, but it feels like the new show doesn't really know what to do with the Cybermen, just that it wants them back. The Age of Steel does briefly brush over the idea that the Cybermen are the next logical evolution for this world. But everything you've invented you did to fight your sickness, the Doctor explains, and that's brilliant. That is so human. But once you get rid of sickness and morality, then what's there to strive for, eh? The Cybermen won't advance. You'll just stop. You'll stay like this forever. That feels like a bit of a superficial argument. After all, these aren't his Cybermen. And talking of utopia, in that episode the 10th Doctor praises humanity's ability to stay in the same basic shape, so it's not like he's quite objective. Actually, I'd say in this scene between the Doctor and Lumic has to be one of the best of the episode, but again it feels like quite reminiscent of a Dr. Davros confrontation that we've seen before. However, I still very much enjoy it, especially when the Doctor is attempting to escape by communicating with Mickey and the blimp. Great stuff. This might be an opportunity to raise...
You just don't get it, do you? An army's nothing. Because those ordinary people, they're the key. The most ordinary person can change the world. Some ordinary man or woman, some idiot. All it takes is for him to find, say, the right numbers, say the right code, say, for example, the code behind the emotional inhibitor, the code right in front of him. Because even an idiot knows computers these days. Knows how to get past firewalls and passwords, knows how to find something encrypted in the Lumic family database. Under, what was it, Pete? Binary what?
Binary 9.
Binary 9. An idiot can find that code. Cancellation code. And he'd keep on typing. Keep on fighting. Anything to save his friends.
Your words are irrelevant.
Yeah, talk too much, that's my problem. Lucky I got that cheap tariff, Rose, for all our long chats on your phone.
The phone.
You will be deleted.
Yes, delete, control, hash, all those lovely buttons. Then, of course, my particular favourite, send. And let's not forget how you seduced all those ordinary people in the first place by making every bit of technology compatible with everything else.
It's for you.
Like this.
Raise an interesting moral point to suggest that the Cybermen are just inherently abhorrent to us as a concept, precisely because they represent our genius and ingenuity perverted. The Cybermen might be a form of evolution, but they are intrinsically and impossibly wrong. Of course, their attempts to impose their own evolution across the universe make them villains, but there is something fundamentally terrifying about the thought that a human-like civilization could actually do that to themselves. Who is the Doctor to decide that a particular life form is unfit to exist, or that a particular avenue of evolution should be closed off just because we, and he, find it disturbing? It would actually be quite a nice minor to Genesis of the Daleks, but a more nuanced one. The Cybermen are, after all, imagined as a vehicle for survival, rather than the genocidal fuel-filled monsters. This would be an interesting point to raise, and the Age of Steel flirts with it briefly, and never really divulges in it. Unfortunately, the Age of Steel undercuts the potentially interesting nuance. Even if the Doctor were to consider the Cybermen have a right to exist, Lumic is still forcing people to convert en masse. When Lumic promises to take away pain, the Doctor responds, "It's not yours to take." This forced conversion invalidates any potentially complicated moral argument and handily identifies the bad guy for the Doctor to deal with that week. Outside of the Cybermen, the Age of Steel also closes out Mickey's story. Indeed, he even gets to borrow one of the Doctor's lines. "Hold on, Rose," he remarks as the building collapses. "I'm coming to get you." It's just a shame that Mickey's only really developed this within the two-parter, and it's more of a shame that this is just a real try run for his Doomsday appearance later on. And it's even more of a shame that Mickey's fate would repeatedly be revised, returning to the regular world in Journey's End. That makes it more of a detour than a character arc, I'd say. There's also the fact that the episode seems to effectively confirm that Mickey has never really belonged in the TARDIS, and that it was just a third wheel all along. I don't mind a companion failing to work, Adam for example last series, but it seems a bit much to suggest that Mickey doesn't fit in the TARDIS because he is effectively intruding on the super awesome fun team of Rose and the Doctor. That's the Doctor in the TARDIS with Rose Tyler, he explains at the end, as if the balance has somehow now been restored by the fact that he is no longer there. Wow. This episode also glosses over some interesting metaphysical questions raised by the fact that the Cybermen realise themselves on an alternative version of Earth. There are Cybermen in our universe, the Doctor states. They started on an ordinary world just like this, they swarmed across the galaxy. This lot are our parallel version, and they're starting from scratch right down here on Earth. It's interesting that so similar a concept, right down to the name and basic design, should appear on a different planet and in a different universe. Does that suggest that perhaps a Cybermen exist in a sort of primordial force, an idea, a thought construct that simply impresses themselves upon reality in a variety of different ways? Of course we know why the Cybermen develop on a parallel world, because Davies wants the show to be relatable, but it's fun to wonder about such things. It's nice high concept to imagine that the Cybermen aren't so much a race of an idea that somehow sweeps through time and space, seeking to be given form. Furthermore, a massive shout out must go to composer Murray Gold once again. He does some great work here, and of particular note is a Sideman track that can be heard throughout the episode, and is honestly one of the very best, and is certainly a favourite of mine. Although totally bombastic and maybe a tad loud in places, it perfectly complements the on-screen action and the Cybermen, especially with the final showdown. Something that writer Tom McRae especially endeavoured to communicate was how precariously enticing the alternative reality was, as the Doctor described it, a gingerbread house, and this totally comes to fruition in the second part. Whilst it's a lot like our world, this Earth is hazardous and alluring, and this is apparent throughout the whole episode. I also admire McRae's attempts to experiment with the characters, their personalities, and their motives in this story. What would Jackie Tyler be like without Rose? What would her relationship with Pete be like if he was still alive? How would Pete change with success? They've got more money than they know what to do with, but as the old saying goes, money can't buy happiness. Rose gave Jackie a reason to live. The scene where Pete reveals that he split up with Jackie invokes poignancy, because it was expected by both Rose and the audience that they'd live a happy life together, but here McRae is testing audience expectations, and composition of familiarity harsh reality. Also, what a clever ending the Age of Steel had. The Cybermen weren't blown up by love or killed by the Doctor, they simply got their emotions reinstated. It was a very tragic resolution to the episode, and quite distressing in places, but it was done just right for family viewing. I'm glad McRae spent a little time focusing on the morality of the actions. I think it would kill them. Can we do that? We've got to, before they kill everyone else. Beforehand too. It gave the story some proper realism. Overall, The Age of Steel is far from a classic, but Graham Harper is able to direct a reasonably exciting runaround that serves as a nice lead-in to the season finale. It also does work as a nice introduction to the Cybermen to a modern audience, and does a great job of bringing them into the new series, but could have done with a tad more polish to really excel further. However, aside from my criticisms, I do really believe this two-parter is underrated. It doesn't actually get the true credit it deserves, as writer Tom McRae does an excellent job with what isn't really an easy story to tell. I give Rise of the Cybermen a 7.5 out of 10 and The Age of Steel a 7 out of 10.